What's up, everybody? We got another Throwback Thursday. Today, I'll be reviewing the 1992 classic Candyman. Let's go. All right, so shout out to everyone that voted for this movie on my poll that I posted about what movie I should review next for my Throwback Thursdays. Candyman is one of my favorites, which is why I had it on my list on which ones to do next. So let's get into it. 1992 is when Candyman came out. It stars Virginia Madsen as Helen Lyle, Tony Todd as Candyman, and Vanessa Williams as Anne Marie McCoy. So it follows Helen Lyle and her friend Bernadette Pierce while they're doing a thesis for their school on urban legends in the Cabrini Greens area. At the same time, Helen Lyle's husband Trevor, which is one of the worst characters in the history of horror cinema that's not an actual horror villain, is teaching the same subject in his class. So they kind of butt heads on that. Now, there's a big foreshadowing on what happens with Trevor when Helen goes to visit him at school, and one of the interactions that Trevor's having with the girl in his class. I mean, it's kind of obvious as to what's going on, but he ends up playing it off, talking Helen out of that, and she kind of goes on about her business. So while Bernadette and Helen are doing their thesis, they come across one of the janitors at school that has heard of Candyman and exposes them to the Candyman legend. Now, the legend apparently is you say the name 5 times and he appears. Bernadette seems to be a little bit more believing in it than Helen is. Helen just wants to get to the bottom of it, and she doesn't really believe in like the mythical urban legends that so many people believe in. So as she's studying this urban legend, she ends up running into a flesh and blood individual, goes by the name of Candyman, that has terrified Cabrini Greens, and he ends up beating her up in the bathroom to the point where she has to go to the hospital. It's pretty bad.
I hear you looking for Candyman.
Before that, she had summoned the Candyman character. So she gets out, she heals herself up, and she thinks she's good to go. And then on her way to develop some photos that they had taken when they went into some of the abandoned buildings, as she's walking back to her car, we get, by my estimation, one of the greatest horror villain introductions of any horror movie.
Yes?
Helen.
Who is that? Who is that?
Helen, I came for you.
Just from Candyman saying her name, Helen, it was such a deep, dark voice and so iconic now, which reminds me, at the very beginning of the movie, we heard his voice at the beginning, but it wasn't until this scene that he showed up and fully made himself present to Helen. And from his perspective, the believing who he is what kind of, when people say his name, he has to kind of show himself, because from his perspective, the story should be enough. From Helen, the stories weren't enough, and he had to show himself to her. So as they interact, Helen passes out, wakes up with blood all over her shirt, and a knife beside her, and the head of Anne Marie's dog beside her. When she's confused, doesn't know what's going on, she comes into the room and finds Anne Marie going crazy because her baby has been taken. So she immediately feels Helen's doing it because obviously from her perspective, she killed her dog. So she attacks Helen. Helen overpowers her and has a knife raised up as the cops come in. Cops arrest her. It's then where we kind of, that foreshadowing in the very beginning with Trevor slowly starts to play out when she tries to call home to tell him that she's arrested. It's, I think, 3 o'clock in the morning, and he doesn't answer the phone. She asked him about it the next day, he said, I was home asleep. He wasn't home asleep. We see that, during the movie. So time goes on, and more people are killed. Her friend Bernadette was killed in front of her by Candyman. So she gets locked up again. And this time she's in for good because they never had a body for the baby. Even though the baby's missing, they can't charge her with, killing something that's not there. So we know Candyman took the baby and is holding him essentially hostage until Helen decides to join him. He essentially wants to make her his legend and make her a candy woman of in a sense, to where they'll have the same legend congruently. So the movie goes on. She ends up breaking out of the institution that she's in, going back to her house, and that's when we get the reveal that Trevor had been cheating on her the entire time with this student from his school. He's since moved her in. They're in the midst of repainting the house that Helen and him lived in. So it's just one bad day after another for this woman. And you start to really feel for her character, and you also see Candyman is very scary. His presence is very huge. This isn't really your typical slasher because he doesn't come across as somebody looking to do harm. Just don't call his name. Will Smith told us that.
Candyman.
Name out your mouth!
So at the same time all this is going on, they're getting ready for this big bonfire. It's a party that they do every year, and they're getting ready for it. When Helen finally finds out where what Candyman's idea is for this baby, he ends up putting the baby in the bonfire, and the baby was going to be a sacrifice unless Helen decided to die in the baby's place. Realistically, Candyman wanted himself, Helen, and the baby all to perish in the fire. Helen's able to get away from him, take the baby, and crawl out, saving the baby. But through all the smoke and the fire, she ends up passing away due to the injuries, which leads us to a really awesome scene at her funeral. There was only a handful of people there, and then you see all of the Cabrini Greens just walk up to her gravesite, and the hook that they have now labeled her as the Candy Woman, because obviously they're not seeing Candyman. All signs point to her being the one that did all of this. So the hook is thrown in the into her grave site with her, and that is seemingly in the movie. Then cutting back to the best part of the movie, the most satisfying part of the movie, where Trevor has realized who he's lost, and he's realized that he made a huge mistake in some of the decisions that he made. So he's in the bathroom, looking in the mirror. He says her name 5 times. Lo and behold, there she goes, and she kills him. This is a satisfying ending, considering all that he put her through leading up to it. So she kills him, and that's the end of the movie. So essentially, Candyman won. He wanted to make her, to allow her to have the same legend that he does. And she essentially does at the end of this movie. Now, thoughts about this movie. It's great. 5 out of 5 stars for me. The score is one of the best scores that you'll hear in any horror movie. The villain Candyman has a presence. And the good thing, we've seen this in history with slasher villains. This was the perfect way to start a franchise because they didn't show a lot of Candyman in this. You really don't know a lot of him. They talk about his backstory. They talked about his backstory, briefly touched on it, but they didn't go deep into it until Candyman 2. So when you are trying to start with a brand new villain, the littlest screen time that you give them and the less you say about them gives the fans wanting more, because his presence was enough to be profound to where you were instantly glued to whatever he did next, and you wanted to see more after this movie was over. Now, there is, when you look at the movie that came out in 2021, one of my biggest issues with that movie is the way that it made it race based. And when I've said it to some people, they say, well, Candyman is race based too. Not Candyman 1. But aside from the point of Helen Lyle being in the middle of the projects, being one of the few white women in the middle of the projects, they don't really lead with the race. It's more about Candyman, which is what I love about this movie. It's a Candyman movie that's got race sprinkled in it, whereas the 2021 version was a race movie with Candyman sprinkled in it. And that's what I think people were, the creators of the newer one were missing. They got away from the heart of what it was. It's supposed to be about the villain. It's not supposed to be about race. Now, he happened to be born, like created out of a racist incident. But again, that isn't focused on until the second movie. The first movie is what lays the groundwork for a great series. Now, part 2 was really good. Part 3 was okay. The remake or the later sequel, because they include some of the characters from the first one, they switched around the focal point, which I think really hurt it. I remember I was younger. Obviously, I was younger when I first saw this movie, and it's one of those movies I can watch over and over and over again. Candyman 1992 for me, 5 out of 5 stars. It's absolutely perfect. The acting is great. The direction is great. The way that it ends, everything ties together. There are no open-ended question marks. There are no, what happened to this person? I wish I would have done that. Everything we wanted from this story is told and finished within this movie, but also leads us to wanting more. This is a great film if you haven't seen it already. But for those of you that have had, get in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. It's the Glad's Horror Channel, the best horror channel on YouTube. Thank you guys for this suggestion. And let me know what else you want me to see me review. Every Thursday, I'll have a new Throwback Thursday review put out there. So you guys just let me know. Thank you very much. Talk to you guys later.